He sat alone in the dark, knees pulled close to his chest, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling as if waiting for it to collapse and finally bury him. The fan creaked above him with a rhythm that matched the heavy beat of his heart. There was no light in the room, no sound except the occasional hum of a motorcycle from the street. It was the kind of silence that didn't soothe, only suffocated. He didn't remember the last time he had eaten properly, the last time he had spoken to someone without flinching, the last time he had looked in the mirror and seen something human looking back. At 21, he felt like a man who had already outlived his own life. His name was Rico, though no one had called him that in a long time. Out in the streets, they just called him that kid or ignored him altogether. Growing up in the slums of Davao City, Rico had learned early what it meant to be invisible. His mother, Elena, worked 2 jobs selling fruit under the blistering sun. His father had vanished when he was 8, swallowed whole by the debts and violence that crept like mold across the city's poorest corners. Rico learned to run before he could read, learned to keep his head down, learned that the world didn't wait for kids like him. By the time he turned 16, most of the boys he played with had either joined gangs or disappeared into the drug underworld. He remembered one of them, Junjun, his best friend since grade school. They used to play pretend boxing matches in the alley behind their homes. Junjun always insisted he was Manny Pacquiao. Rico didn't mind being the punching bag, just to see his friend smile. But that smile vanished 2 years later when Junjun was found bleeding in a ditch behind the barangay hall. Shot 3 times. No suspects, no arrests, no justice, just silence. That was the first time Rico truly felt the emptiness settle into his bones. The second time was when he dropped out of school. He couldn't focus, couldn't breathe in the classrooms that felt more like cages than sanctuaries. His mother begged him to stay, but what was the point? Every morning felt like walking uphill with no legs. So he drifted, slept in parks, did odd jobs, most of them illegal. There were nights he didn't want to wake up the next day, nights when he stared at the edge of a rooftop and wondered how hard he'd have to fall to make the pain stop. And then, randomly, inexplicably, Manny Pacquiao appeared. It was one of those nights. Heavy rain, soaked clothes, stomach gnawing at itself. Rico had ducked into a makeshift shelter run by a church near Roxas Avenue. There was a battered old phone plugged into the wall, used by volunteers to play music or sermons for the people sleeping there. No one else was around. He tapped on it, aimlessly. No plan, just a vague hunger for distraction. In the YouTube search bar, he typed, Filipino hero. The first result was a video of Pacquiao versus Miguel Cotto. He had heard the name before, everyone had, but he had never sat and watched the man fight. The video started. Rico expected glamour, victory, perfection. But what he saw was something else entirely. Pacquiao bled. Pacquiao staggered. Pacquiao got hit again and again, and still kept moving. There was fury in his fists, yes, but there was something more powerful, survival. The fight wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it was real, raw, gritty. And Manny smiled in the middle of it, a cracked lip, a black eye, and still, he smiled. Rico watched that fight 3 times that night, and then he watched more. Pacquiao versus Morales, Pacquiao versus Hatton, Pacquiao versus Barrera. Each one was a lesson, not in boxing but in defiance, in resilience. He scribbled notes on the back of torn flyers, angles, combinations, footwork. But mostly, he wrote down the quotes. He memorized them like gospel. You don't need to be rich to be great, just relentless. I came from nothing. That's why I fight like I've got nothing to lose. God raised me from poverty. I owe him every punch. For the first time in years, Rico felt something stirring in his chest that wasn't dread. He felt anger, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that demands more. He didn't want to disappear anymore. He wanted to get back up. He didn't know how, not yet, but the spark had been lit. He started running every morning before the sun climbed over the roofs. Old rubber shoes, soles worn thin, a shirt 2 sizes too big. People stared. He didn't care. He ran until his lungs begged him to stop, until his legs trembled, until he could barely breathe. Then he ran more. He found a run-down boxing gym near Banquerohan Market. The owner was an old man named Lolo Benny, who had trained fighters back in the 80s. Rico stood outside the gate for 3 days before he worked up the courage to ask, "Can I train here?" Lolo Benny looked him up and down. "You got money?" "No," Rico said, "but I can clean. I'll mop the floor, wash the gloves. Whatever it takes," the old man grunted. "We'll see." And so began his second life. Mornings started at 4:30 a.m. with laps around the market, then chores, then training, jump rope, shadow boxing, bag work. Pain became routine, sores on his knuckles, blisters on his feet, but he kept going. Because every night before he slept, he watched another Pacquiao fight, and every morning he imagined the champion whispering in his ear, "Keep fighting, kid." It wasn't easy, far from it. There were days he wanted to quit, days he collapsed on the gym floor, stomach empty, tears mixing with sweat. But quitting meant death. Maybe not a physical one, but the slow kind, the kind that eats away your soul. So he punched back. He started writing letters to Pacquiao, not to send, just to survive. He scribbled them in old notebooks, sometimes on scraps of paper. "Dear Manny, today I wanted to give up, but I thought of you getting knocked down by Marquez and standing back up, so I stood up too. Dear Manny, I got into a fight with a guy who said I'm wasting my time. He said I'll never be you. Maybe he's right, but I still believe. Dear Manny, if I die tomorrow, I just want you to know that your fights saved me." They weren't letters. They were lifelines. People started noticing the change. The quiet kid from the streets now walked with a purpose. His punches had rhythm, his eyes, fire. He still didn't talk much, but when he did, it was with weight. One night, while watching Pacquiao's post-fight interview after beating Thurman, Rico whispered to himself, "That's me. I'm next." He didn't mean next champion. He meant next survivor. Because in the broken corners of the world, you don't dream of belts. You dream of breath. And for the first time in his life, Rico wanted to live, not exist, not endure, live. Because Manny Pacquiao had shown him that greatness wasn't reserved for the lucky. It was forged in fire, and Rico was ready to burn. He didn't wake up one day a fighter. No bell rang to declare the start of a new chapter. It was slower than that. It was cold mornings and aching limbs, hands bleeding through worn-out wraps, and a dull, persistent voice in his head asking, "Why are you doing this?" The truth was, he still didn't fully know. He wasn't chasing medals. He didn't dream of belts. He wasn't even sure he'd ever get into a real ring. But every day he trained was one more day he didn't give up. And that counted for something. Maybe everything. In the small gym that smelled of sweat, rust, and cheap alcohol-based disinfectant, Rico learned to fight without a crowd, without applause. The bags didn't cheer when he landed a clean combination. The cracked mirrors didn't nod when his footwork finally flowed, but none of that mattered. Because every time he stepped inside the gym, it felt like a refusal, a protest against the version of himself that once wanted to vanish. He cleaned the place like it was sacred. He swept the floor before training and mopped it after, washed hand wraps, folded towels, fixed busted jump ropes with frayed shoelaces. Coach Benny, the old trainer with a crooked back and sharper eyes than anyone his age should still have, watched him with growing respect. "Kid's not fast," Benny would grumble to one of the older boxers, "but he doesn't back off, not even when he's hurting." And Rico was always hurting. The first time he sparred, he got dropped by a soft right hook he didn't even see coming. The room tilted, his ears rang, and the world flickered out for a second. When he came to, Benny didn't ask if he was okay, just said, "Now you know what a mistake feels like." Rico nodded, got up, didn't run. That became his thing, getting up. He started coming in earlier, stayed later. While others went home, he shadowboxed under the flickering bulb in the corner. Sometimes he talked to the bag like it was the past. "You took Junjun. You made my mum cry every night. You left me for dead, but I'm still here." He didn't need therapy. He had fists and Manny, always Manny. Rico printed out a photo of Pacquiao, mid-fight, gloves raised, eyes blazing, and taped it above his bed in the one-room home he shared with his mother. She didn't understand the obsession, didn't understand why he came home limping, bruised, silent. She thought he was falling into another kind of darkness. "You're not a boxer," she told him one night as she nursed his swollen knuckles with warm water. "You're a good boy. Come work with me. Sell fruit. At least it's safe." Rico looked at her, didn't say anything. Because how could he explain that safe was the most dangerous thing in the world for someone like him? That safety in his world meant slow death. That Manny Pacquiao hadn't just inspired him, he had given him something that selling mangoes never could, a fight that meant something. But even so, things got harder. His mother's health began to fail, something with her lungs. She coughed constantly, couldn't walk far. Medical bills piled up. Rico took side jobs, carrying crates at the market, washing cars, delivering ice. He worked all day, trained at night, slept less, ached more. Sometimes, while wiping sweat off the heavy bag at midnight, he wondered if this was what dying slowly looked like, pouring everything you had into something that gave nothing back. But every time he asked that question, something inside him whispered, "Keep going." So he kept going. In the gym, a few boxers started mocking him behind his back, said he was just a wannabe, said watching Pacquiao on YouTube didn't make you a fighter. One guy, Paulo, taller, heavier, already had a couple amateur fights, confronted him during warm-ups. "You think you're special because you got a poster of Pacquiao?" he spat. "He's a legend, you're nothing." Rico didn't answer. He just stared, breathing slow, fists still wrapped. He had learned from Pacquiao that fighting wasn't about yelling louder, it was about surviving longer. That night he went home and wrote another letter. "Dear Manny, today someone tried to break me. I wanted to hit him, but I didn't. I just hit the bag until my arms gave out. I think that counts for something." He started reading books about discipline, about mental toughness. Not because he wanted to be smart, but because he needed armor. Life was still swinging at him, even outside the ring. He had to learn to block more than just jabs. And then, one day, Benny called him over after training. The old man rubbed his chin like he was chewing on something bitter. "There's an amateur showcase next month," he said. "1 round, 2 minutes, mostly for rookies. You want to fight?" Rico's heart stumbled. He had dreamed of this moment, and now that it was real, he felt ice in his blood. "I'm not ready," he said quietly. "No one ever is," Benny said. "But you show up. That's what matters." So he said yes. The month that followed was hell. He pushed himself harder than ever, woke up earlier, ran longer, cut junk food, watched more tape, studied southpaw technique, practiced slipping jabs until his neck cramped, visualized himself in the ring, imagined what fear would feel like, and how to walk through it. He even stopped writing letters, not because he didn't need to, but because he needed all his time to become the man they were addressed to. The day of the fight, his mother came with him. Her face was drawn, thin, but her eyes were proud. She clutched a rosary the whole time. Backstage, Rico felt like his lungs were full of cement. His hands were taped, gloves laced, headgear secured, but his mind was racing. What if he froze? What if he got hurt? What if... Then he remembered Pacquiao, standing in the ring, looking across at men taller, stronger, richer, and smiling. Rico took a breath, whispered to himself, "Smile, no matter what." When the bell rang, time fractured. His opponent rushed in, wild, sloppy punches. Rico backed up, remembered to breathe. He didn't land anything big at first, just touched, moved, touched again. But halfway through he saw an opening, a right cross. He threw it. It landed clean. The crowd gasped. By the time the bell rang again, Rico's chest was heaving, legs shaking. The fight was over. 2 minutes of fury and instinct and raw survival. He didn't know who had won, but it didn't matter, because he didn't run, didn't quit, didn't fall, and that was a win. They called the result, split decision, in his favor. People clapped, someone whistled. He didn't lift his arms, didn't bow, just stood there dazed, as if his soul hadn't caught up with his body. Later in the bathroom he looked at his reflection, sweat-covered, bruised, alive. He whispered, "Thank you, Manny." Then he went home. wrote one more letter. "Dear Manny, I fought tonight, not just in the ring, but in me. And I think for once, I didn't lose." He didn't expect anything to happen after that fight. No parade, no contracts, no headlines. He went home the same way he came, sore, silent, with his mother's hand in his. But something had shifted inside him. That split-decision victory, barely 2 minutes long, had opened a door Rico didn't know he'd been waiting to walk through his whole life. Coach Benny clapped him on the shoulder the next morning and handed him a bottle of liniment and a cracked smile. "You didn't embarrass us," he said, which was Benny speak for, "I'm proud of you." Other fighters started calling him by his name. Not the kid, not Pacquiao boy, just Rico. He kept training. One fight became 2, then 3. Local events, small gyms, crowds of 20 or 30 people. He wasn't undefeated. He lost his second fight on points, a tight decision against a fighter more experienced and heavier, but he didn't care. Every time he stepped into the ring, he became more than a survivor. He became a builder of self, of story, of soul. Still, it wasn't easy. The world didn't magically reward him for fighting back. His mother's condition worsened. Rico spent nights by her bedside, praying in silence, sometimes reading Bible verses aloud, just to fill the room with something other than coughing. He started donating part of his small fight earnings to help other kids at the gym, buying hand wraps, sharing his running shoes when someone's tore open. He no longer wrote letters to Manny Pacquiao. Instead, he spoke to him out loud in the early hours before the sun came up. "Today I'll keep my chin tucked, just like you do. I watched you against Margarito again last night. You didn't flinch once. Somebody called me a real boxer today. I almost cried. And then one morning it happened. Rico was walking back from training, sweat still glistening on his neck, when his phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize, with a link attached. Cautiously, he tapped it. It was a video, a short clip, a sports journalist speaking Tagalog standing in front of a boxing ring. Behind him, footage of Rico's last fight. Someone had filmed it from the stands. Overlaid with it, the caption, "The boy who says Manny Pacquiao saved his life, now fighting his own battles." He froze in the street. Cars honked. People brushed past him. But he just stood there, holding the phone as if it might catch fire. He hadn't told anyone, hadn't shared his story publicly. The reporter must have heard about it from someone at the gym. Maybe Benny. Maybe one of the kids he'd helped. He didn't know how to feel. Vulnerable, exposed, but also free. By the end of the day, the video had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. He got messages from all over the Philippines, strangers, other fighters, even students, telling him how his story gave them hope. Some said they were depressed. Some had lost family. Some said they were on the edge like he had been once. And then came the message that made his knees buckle. It was from a verified account, Manny Pacquiao, a simple private message. "I saw your fight. I saw your story. You have the heart of a champion. Can we meet?" Rico read the words at least 10 times. He didn't respond right away. He paced. He cried. He laughed without sound. Then, slowly, with shaking fingers, he typed, "Yes, I would be honored." A week later, he was on a bus to Manila. Not a plane, he didn't ask for that, didn't want it. He sat in the back, hoodie up, hands clenched together in his lap. Outside the window, the landscape blurred by in shades of brown and green and smog. He hadn't told his mother until the last moment. She cried, not because she was worried, but because for the first time in years, she looked at him and saw a man she didn't recognize. Not the boy who ran from life, but the one who chased it. The day he walked into the gym in General Santos City, Rico felt like he was stepping into a dream he had no business being in. The place was clean, wide, filled with echoing sounds of leather and breath and barked instructions. And then there he was, Manny, shorter in person, older. But there was something in his presence, a gravity that pulled the world tighter around him. He smiled when he saw Rico and opened his arms. "Come here, kid." Rico walked slowly, as if he might wake up before he got there. Then Manny hugged him, not a handshake, not a formal nod, a real hug. Two fighters, two stories, one language. "You okay?" Manny asked. Rico nodded, too choked to speak. They sat, talked. Rico told him everything. The streets, the nights in shelters, the first fight on YouTube. Manny listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Rico finished, he looked away, embarrassed. "I know I'm not anyone," he said. "But you saved my life." Manny leaned forward. "You are someone," he said quietly. "You're proof that the fight isn't about titles. It's about getting back up. And you got up, more times than I ever had to." They trained together for 3 days. Rico watched in awe as Manny moved, still sharp, still quick, still precise. He soaked in every moment, the rhythm of his feet, the way he twisted his hips, how he breathed through punches. Manny didn't talk much while training, but every once in a while he'd shout, "Faster," or "Again," or "Like this," and Rico would mimic him like a mirror. On the last day they sat in the locker room, gloves off, sweat dripping from their temples. "You still write those letters?" Manny asked suddenly. Rico laughed. "Not anymore. I started talking to you instead. Out loud." Manny smiled. "I heard them anyway." Before Rico left, Manny gave him a pair of signed gloves. But more importantly, he gave him something Rico never imagined. A promise. "We're opening a new training center for at-risk youth," Manny said, "in Davao. I want you to help. Not just train them, show them. Be what you didn't have." Rico didn't answer right away. His chest was full of something he couldn't name. It wasn't pride. It was something older, deeper. A kind of grace. "I will," he said finally. "I promise." When Rico returned home, his mother met him at the door. She didn't ask questions, just looked at his face, touched his cheek and said, "You found what you were looking for, didn't you?" He nodded. Months passed. Rico began coaching at the new center, mornings filled with echoes of rope skipping and leather snapping on pads. The kids were rough, hungry, wild, just like he had been. Some of them didn't trust him. Others clung to his every word. He taught them how to jab, how to guard, but more than anything, he taught them how to keep going. In his 4th professional fight, he won by TKO in the 3rd round. Not a huge event, but it was the first time he smiled during a fight. He pointed to the crowd afterward, where his mother sat in a wheelchair. And then he pointed to the sky. Not because Manny had died, but because Manny had risen too high to touch anymore. And Rico understood now. That's what mentors are. They fly ahead so you remember it's possible. In his post-fight interview, the host asked, "What keeps you going?" Rico looked into the camera, his voice didn't shake. "I thought my story ended when I lost everything. But then I learned something from Manny Pacquiao. Sometimes the bottom is where you learn to stand. Sometimes the fight isn't to win, it's just to not quit." He paused, smiled. "I'm alive because of Manny Pacquiao. But today, I live for me."